What I believe is a good thing to track is pipeline movement. I see organizations from time to time want to conduct a campaign because they see a campaign as a means to build a major gift program. A campaign is not a shortcut to build a major gift program. The major gift program really needs to be in place before the campaign starts.
64% of nonprofits actually conduct these year-end challenge match campaigns. So they are out there for sure. And as you have said, this really does make an impact on the overall fundraising.
Particularly for a nonprofit organization that's trying to do something good for the community and trying to give something back, there will be many, many people who care. Just talk to the people that you think would be your lead donors first before we even talk about a feasibility study. Just have a conversation with them. You don't have to go into every conversation thinking it's going to end with an ask.
You're listening to The Nonprofit Boost, where Double the Donation and industry leaders share practical tips to help you grow revenue and boost corporate fundraising at your nonprofit.
Nonprofits are always being asked to do more with limited time and resources. Double the Donation's virtual summits offer practical insights, expert advice, and actionable ideas to help you grow your impact. Check out the summit calendar and register at doubletheDonation.com/virtual-summits. We'll see you there.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Nonprofit Boost by Double the Donation. You're here with me, Giland, and we are going to talk about From Stall to Soaring, Reigniting a Major Gifts or Capital Campaign. And you're going to want to listen to this because we have none other than Don Souhrada, President and CEO of TWB Fundraising, to give us some amazing yet practical tips and tricks to get that momentum going. Hey, Don, how's it going?
Hello, everybody.
Great to have you here, Don.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you, Giland.
We've chatted a few times before this, but for our listeners who aren't that familiar with you or with TWB Fundraising for that matter, could you just give us a brief overview of who you are, what you do, and basically how you got into this whole industry?
TWB Fundraising, established in Chicago. We were originally known as Termolin, Watkins and Brandt. Our founders worked at different institutions in the city. And about 3 years ago, we rebranded to TWB Fundraising. It's always been our domain. So just made it easier for people to remember who we are. I started my career as a student at the University of Iowa Foundation. I was just looking for a student job, and I found one at the University of Iowa Foundation. And in that role, I wasn't fundraising. I was really just supervising or delivering office tasks, stuffing envelopes, running errands, just whatever the executives needed. And at the end of my my studies, it really occurred to me that I had a great 4-year internship. So at that point, I thought that it would make good sense for me to pursue a career in nonprofit fundraising, and haven't looked back.
Wow. So it's always been the path that you wanted to take, so to speak.
I didn't know it, but professionally, that's true. I studied public relations, and the fundraising process and the public relations process are very similar. We go through the same kind of research and building a strategy and executing and then following up. So it was really a good fit for me. And I just have really enjoyed working with a variety of nonprofit organizations and all the great people that I've had a chance to meet.
Wow, that's amazing. And I mean, with your years of expertise and the passion that you clearly have for fundraising, you are also a perfect fit to have on today to talk about this topic. So now, Don, let's get into it. So over at DTD, we hear from a lot of leaders who are either in the middle of a big campaign or even thinking about just launching one, whether it may be a major gifts effort or a full capital campaign. And a theme that comes up again and again is this. Things start strong and you get those early wins, and then it just slows down. The board feels it, the staff feel it, and everyone starts to wonder, is this just a normal lull, or is our campaign actually stalling out? So, Don, to start us off, when you look at major gift or capital campaigns that have stalled out, just like in the example I said, what are the most common early warning signs you see? It could be both in the numbers or in the day to day stories that you hear from staff and volunteers.
Every campaign goes through ups and downs. There are ebbs and flows of a campaign. It takes a great deal of energy, particularly when volunteers are involved. So that's a very important thing to look at. From a data point of view, what I believe is a good thing to track is pipeline movement. So if we're thinking about prospects in the pipeline, are those prospects moving from introducing the idea to asking for permission to present a proposal, to submitting the proposal, to closing the proposal? It's important for volunteers and for staff to have a clear follow-up strategy with each one of these prospects. And the staff really needs to be involved in supporting volunteers. But where I see a campaign stall is when we have our regular check-in meetings and we hear consistently people saying things like, I need to get back to that person. That person hasn't returned my phone call. These kinds of things, in some cases, to me, are clues that the volunteer or the staff member may not have done the work that they needed to do to be prepared for that check-in meeting. So that's a really simple indication of things that are starting to go off the rails, but maintaining momentum is really important.
So you're saying that the momentum is really just keeping it going and just not giving into those lulls and building on those warning signs that you did say. When you look across the capital campaigns that you've seen stall or, as you've said, lose momentum, what are the most common underlying reasons? Are there a few patterns, whether in strategy, leadership, donor engagement, or even in their internal culture that tend to show up again and again when a major gifts or capital campaign hits a slump?
When I've seen this situation, I go back to what we do to build a campaign to begin with. And so when I think about a campaign, I'm thinking about the case for support. I'm thinking about the leadership. I'm thinking about prospects and the plan. And in the plan, that means the execution. How are we going to track progress? How are we going to maintain the follow-up and keep things moving along? I'm not sure this answers your specific question, but it's just the first way I can think about how to answer it is that if there's a stalled campaign, if there's a problem with a campaign, it's probably in one of those areas. Now, if we think about a campaign that has an excellent plan or an excellent case for support, an excellent case for support, then we need to look at, is the leadership causing a bottleneck? Are there enough prospects to fill out a campaign pipeline? And anybody could go online and build out a campaign gift table and understand how many prospects they need at different levels for a campaign to succeed. And obviously, that's just a guide. It's never going to fall that way. But it's important before even starting a campaign to understand who those people will be. That's an area where I do see campaigns stall, is if an organization is unrealistic about the prospects that they have before they get into a campaign.
So, Don, you've talked about the pipeline, the plan, and of course, looking inward. And that includes, of course, assessing the leadership. And now I'm curious, what do you think that an outside perspective or perhaps a structured assessment could make a difference in these kinds of problems, especially because, of course, when you're looking inside and you're part of the organization running that campaign, you're a little too close to the situation and you might feel that emotional toll as well. So I think I'm curious, how would you bring an outsider's perspective to help solve the situation?
I'd like to go back to the beginning and say that I think it's very important for organizations that are considering campaigns to be realistic and to be particularly thoughtful if they are ready to conduct a campaign. I see organizations from time to time want to conduct a campaign because they see a campaign as a means to build a major gift program. And a campaign is not a shortcut to build a major gift program. The major gift program really needs to be in place before the campaign starts. I've talked to potential clients lately who have talked about having a campaign And I've asked them, do they know who their lead donor might be or lead donors might be? If you're looking at a gift table and you know that maybe a gift of $1 million is required, do they know who that $1 million donor might be? And there's no reason for an organization to hold off on talking to those people before even engaging counsel. So there's a good deal of work that needs to be done at the front end of a campaign, even at the front end of a feasibility study, to prepare people, to get them mentally prepared to give to a campaign. And we're not likely to convince somebody who's not already interested in a cause to make a significant investment in a campaign. That may happen, but the best course of action is to know that there are enough people who care and are invested, that those folks will be there.
Gave me a lot of perspective on how even the donors view these kinds of campaigns, these kinds of projects that they have up. And yes, I do really appreciate that perspective that you gave. We've talked about diagnosing the issues. We've talked about looking inside. We've talked about consulting other people outside the organization. So the next step, of course, is to actually apply these things that they have gathered to help organizations recenter around this compelling case for support, so the vision that they did have feels urgent and achievable again. And in your experience, what are a few of the most effective tactical moves that you've seen, like perhaps resegmenting top prospects or resettling leadership expectations or using a campaign sprint or a challenge match to jumpstart momentum?
A challenge certainly can be a great tactic to jumpstart momentum. I also see the value of leadership. And, every campaign starts with strong leadership. In my view, one of the most important decisions an organization can make when going into a campaign is deciding who will be the chairs, whether those chairs are honorary or if they're actually really digging in and doing the day-to-day work. Somebody needs to own the campaign. And the folks who own it should be people that the community, however you define that community, that the community respects and that the community has confidence in will get the campaign finished. Because when we think about an individual making an investment in a campaign and making a commitment to a campaign, regardless of the size of their gift, it will be a lot to them. And what they want to know is that that campaign will be successful. So another reason that campaigns could stall is because the people who are being solicited lose confidence that that campaign is actually going to be successful. And how can we reinstill that confidence? You mentioned a challenge, and I think a challenge is a terrific way to help people have confidence and give them a sense of urgency. It can also give board members a sense of urgency to conduct whatever conversations they need to have or any solicitations they need to have to help achieve that match. Speaking of matches, I wanted to say too that something that is really helpful about a challenge gift is that it can motivate somebody to make a larger gift who might not normally make that gift. If you explain to them that you're going to leverage other people's support and that it will help them, they will help inspire others. Their leadership will help to inspire others. I find that the folks that have the capability to make the largest gifts are more likely to stretch. And, I've heard plenty of people who are fabulously wealthy in campaigns say, listen, I'm not a blank check. If I'm the only one involved in this, everybody will think that I'm going to do this by myself. And I'm not prepared to complete this project on my own. So lead donors can be cautious about how visible they want to be and about how generous they want to be at the outset for those reasons.
Exactly. I love how you mentioned that they don't want to do this alone, because I agree that in fundraising, there's always this sense of community. And from what we have seen, it's that actually the statistics, if I may just bring in some numbers here, they're actually mind-blowing, so to speak, because as much as 84% of donors say that a match is makes them more likely to give. And that's a huge amount of donors. And in fact, even 100% of these surveyed nonprofits say that these matching challenges or these challenge grants lead directly to an increase in their campaign fundraising. So, you know what? It works. We have the statistics, we have the numbers. And for those out there who are thinking that it would be hard, perhaps, to find a nonprofit or a school that does these kinds of challenge matches, these challenge grants, that's actually not the case, because 64% of nonprofits actually conduct these year-end challenge match campaigns. So they are out there for sure. And as you have said, this really does make an impact on the overall fundraising. And it's just so nice rather, to see how these all work together to fund that same cause that we all just had in the beginning.
It's so true. And it's really important because let's just say an organization has a goal, and some might think it would be a dream to have one person come in and write a check and just complete the campaign, but it doesn't build a base for the long term. And it also doesn't build the sense of community. I completed supporting a museum recently, and they had terrific broad-based support across the state. And now all of those people are invested in the museum and invested in the museum's success. And if one person had come in and just written the check, those hundreds of people who made a gift wouldn't have felt so connected and would have felt like a part of it.
Exactly.
So everybody can celebrate the success of this.
Exactly. It's just like passing it on, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love how you mentioned the museum. Could you perhaps tell us more about how that worked and what impact was seen?
That story is an important one from the point of view of conducting a feasibility study. And I know that there's a lot of differing opinions about the value of feasibility studies. In this particular case, the feasibility study was really important because the organization had a goal. We tested a goal of $20 million on the campaign. And our charge was to tell them, can they raise $20 million? It was a go or no go. They were in a position where they had a facility and they wanted to do a renovation and an expansion. So they weren't in a position where they needed something that they didn't have. They wanted to build on what they already had. And if they didn't have the money to do it, they didn't have to do it. What the feasibility study helped us to do was compile the list of individuals that they believe would be their lead donors, to have candid conversations with those people, and not only determine if people would consider making an investment in the campaign, taking the temperature of the enthusiasm of the people we were talking to, understanding how willing those people would be to participate as a volunteer. Would they open up their home to a reception? Would they invite their friends? Would they be willing to solicit? And in that particular case, in every benchmark we had, the folks that I interviewed collectively exceeded the benchmark of what we typically see when conducting these campaigns. So I had a great deal of confidence that they were in a position to succeed. And I'll have to just tell you just a really quick story that illustrated to me the enthusiasm of the constituents and the people who cared about the museum. There was one person in particular I interviewed, and we had talked for an hour or an hour and a half. We had a delightful conversation, but it was time for me to go. So as I was walking out of the apartment, the person I interviewed followed me and just kept following me all the way to the elevator. And she said to me, well, when is the building going to be done? And so that kind of enthusiasm was just absolutely palpable. And it's anecdotal, and it was just one case, but it was an example of these people really care. They're really excited about seeing the finished product. And it wasn't something that they were thinking of out of obligation. It was something that they personally wanted to see happen. And that was very gratifying.
I love that story. It's very touching. You've got me smiling over here. I could just imagine the enthusiasm of that person just to follow you all the way to the elevator. And that's a great example, actually, of how the solution isn't always to bring in new people, new donors, but rather to just open the doors more to those people who you are already talking to. Let them know about more ways for them to give. Let them know about how their impact is growing. Let them know the status of the campaign. As you've said, she's so excited, or they're so excited rather, to know about how the building is going. And I think that's just a reminder for all of us to look inward and to not abandon those people who have already donated once, because as you've said, the enthusiasm is there. They've showed that they care. And of course, you have to show them as well that you care about the effort that they gave, that the money that they gave, by fostering that relationship with them, keeping them updated and just in the loop.
For better, well, I shouldn't even say for better. It's a reality of where we are today. Following the pandemic, organizations that started campaigns and started construction projects in particular during the pandemic saw the costs soar. And a lot of organizations have been in a position where they've had to go back to their donors for a second or a third ask. And the critical piece is just to be transparent and demonstrate a level of responsibility and steward what they've already done and help them to understand that leadership of the organization has done everything they can to keep costs down. But there are certain circumstances outside of our control, and we certainly saw that during the pandemic.
I really do have a lot of respect for these nonprofits, these organizations who just kept on pushing forward, even in those difficult times, because, of course, nonprofits, when you think about society, you don't really think of them as a pillar, but in actuality, they're doing so much. Like when our civil society fails, they're there to really support these communities, these groups of people who really have nowhere to go or who do need, who have a lot of needs in these trying times. And Don, from your stories, from your tips, you've given us so many valuable strategies for organizations with the resources to do a full assessment or bring in some outside help. And since we are on the topic of these nonprofits who may be struggling a bit, and some of our listeners may also be part of these nonprofits wherein the development shop may just be one or two people, the budget for consultants is limited to say the least. But of course, they're still running these real campaigns, reaching out to real people, and they're feeling the loss of this momentum because they don't have access to the full toolkit that we've been talking about. So I guess to land this conversation with something really, really practical that any organization can do, no matter their size or their budget, for a smaller or mid-sized organization that, well, can't afford this full feasibility study or formal campaign assessment, what would be one concrete step that they can take even this month using only the data and the relationships that they already currently have to quickly gauge where their campaign is stuck and how to begin reigniting this major gift momentum?
Find a way to distance themselves from the emotion of the campaign. That's the first step at an individual level to begin to take the next steps. Something that is very true, though, is that campaigns can be stressful and people feel a great deal of responsibility. Staff feels a great deal of responsibility. And it's important to think about it from a data perspective. So you mentioned the data that they already have. So this might be kind of a circular answer to what you're saying. But I think that what we need to do is to think about progress and think about steps. Don't allow the drama of a campaign to negatively impact the progress. And if one focuses on the data, meaning, do we have the prospects? Are we executing on our conversations? Can we see that we're having more conversations this week than we had last week, or that we're continuing on a consistent stage of interaction with our potential donors? We can see what it will take to get to the successful goal. So this part, I think, answers your question more fully, which is what they can do is talk to people. They can talk to leadership. They can talk to donors. They can talk to prospective donors. Just really be honest and transparent about what they're thinking. And this is true in the middle of a campaign, but it's also true at the beginning of a campaign. And, I mentioned this potential client that talked to me recently about, I might not have even mentioned this. I'm not sure I already covered this ground, but a potential client talked to me about their campaign. And I said, just talk to the people that you think would be your lead donors first before we even talk about a feasibility study. Just have a conversation with them. You don't have to go into every conversation thinking it's going to end with an ask. Those folks will give advice, and they will, if they care, and they're people who are engaged, can help leaders of nonprofit organizations to solve their problem. Where we get into trouble, I think, in life, in nonprofit organizations and for-profit organizations, is when we try to do it all by ourselves. And particularly for a nonprofit organization that's trying to do something good for the community and trying to give something back, there will be many, many people who care and want to solve whatever problem the organization is trying to solve and advance their mission. And if those people aren't out there, then that's a different problem. But for any campaign to raise money, there has to be individuals who care enough to invest. And those people who are willing to invest will also be willing to talk and willing to be supportive and give advice and share their expertise. I mean, we talk about time, talent, and treasure. It's not just about the treasure. And so identifying who those people might be who would be willing to help is really important. But the next step is actually getting out and talking to them. And that's a piece that we see missing too frequently in campaigns that are failing.
I love that. Simple, very actionable, yet of course, really, really impactful. Don, you've shared so much today, from the practical to the experiential to, of course, ending on this really beautiful emotional note. And I would like to thank you for your time. But of course, is there anything else that you would like to add, or any last words for our audience for this episode?
I would just like to thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of my experience. I've worked in nonprofit organizations all my life, and I know that it doesn't take a full engagement to make a difference. I'm happy to provide people with some support, and I encourage anybody who's listening to look for me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to connect.
Everyone, that was Don Souhrada from TWB Fundraising, President and CEO, talking about from stalled to soaring, how to reignite a major gifts or capital campaign. Once again, you've been listening to the Nonprofit Boost by Double the Donation with me, Giland, and we'll see you next time. Bye!
Here's your next steps. Visit doublethedonation.com to explore the tools and strategies that schools and nonprofits use to unlock more revenue through corporate fundraising. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share the video with your team and peers.